Start on time. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this June 2nd, 2021 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I'm delighted to welcome board members and advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its Twitter page at edstateboard_NC. And you can follow the meeting online and see all of our materials by going to SBE meetings at www.ncpublicschools.org. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on its action items. Essentially, we're returning to our pre-COVID protocols. On Monday, we paused from our often hectic lives to celebrate a holiday which traditionally marks the beginning of summer, a day of family gatherings, feast of hot dogs, hamburgers, and barbecue, outdoor games, and perhaps singing during the seventh inning stretch, God Bless America. Memorial Day is one of those rare occasions when we can set aside our differences, celebrate the blessings of living in a great country, and expressing our gratitude to those who gave the ultimate sacrifice so that we can stand together, united as Americans. And may that spirit carry on in each one of us as we work together on behalf of our students this day and the days ahead. To say the least, this school year has been unprecedented. Our educators, our students, and their families have demonstrated resilience, conquering repeated challenges throughout the year. And as we close out this school year and prepare for summer learning, we must embrace the opportunities afforded us by this pandemic and continue to maximize the innovative practices and skills that our educators have created. The work over the last year has shown the strength in our public education system as we reimagined education almost overnight to benefit the academic and non-academic skills of our students, proving that we are at our best when we focus on meeting the needs of the whole child in each and every child. June is typically the last month of the school year for traditional calendar schools and preparations for the opening of our alternative scheduled schools. So our best wishes to all students and teachers this month as they close out or begin a new year. I also wish to extend congratulations to our high school students who are graduating or have already graduated and will begin the next phase in their educational journey or career. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval of the June 2nd and 3rd, 2021 agenda. Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Hall? Hall? Dr. Tiffany Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White? Mr. Hall? Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Ms.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, board members. Before we begin our committee meetings, just a brief comment. In this monthly meeting, we will have an opportunity to review and adopt the supporting documents for the social studies standards that we approved in February earlier this year. Our state superintendent, department staff, and educators across our state have worked tirelessly to prepare these instructional tools to assist our students in learning about this terrific country that we share and together call home. I wish to extend our thanks to this team for the countless hours they spent preparing these documents. With much the same spirit as our military service members that we celebrated on Monday, this was, for our educators, a labor of love and commitment to our students and to our country. These long-awaited supporting documents will enable our teachers to implement with fidelity the approved standards for the benefit of all students. We'll now proceed to our committee meetings, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. First on the agenda this morning is a literacy update. We are going to delay that discussion to our meeting tomorrow in closed session. So we will go immediately to the Rethink grant update. And I believe, Dr. Emery, you're starting us with that discussion?
Good morning. Nice to be here, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, board members, and all of you wonderful. It's delightful to be here. And I'm excited to start you off with something really positive today. Last year, just about this time, when the world sort of was turned upside down, we learned that in addition to CARES dollars, there was an opportunity to compete for federal grant dollars that would allow us to be innovative and use the silver lining of what we've gone through to benefit districts. And I do just want to thank those folks who started us on this journey. And supposed to be. Just a little context here. When this came about, the board chair, then superintendent, Jeff Coltrane from the governor's office, Dr. Stegall, and myself were meeting every day at 8:30. And so when we found out about this opportunity, it was easy to get the green light to go. And we put together a very small group here at the department. And that group, still to this day, I would call them now the quasi-advisory committee who has shepherded this thing through. They had the vision. It was their planning and effort that really made this happen. So I don't know who is here, but Liz Colbert. Onyx is here. That's a Wren. And myself. In addition to everything else that was going on at the time, said, we can do this. And we're so grateful for the support of RTI, who has this expertise group of folks who write federal grants, who partnered with us to go after this. As you all know, we were one of 11 states in the country to get one of these awards. There were three categories, and we were in the most competitive category. I just have to add that. One of them was geared towards parent support for remote learning. A second was to begin or extend virtual public opportunity. And the third was create your own. And because we thought these components were so important, we wanted to do a blended model. And so we did compete in this area. And I want you to know only 4 awards across the country were given in that third category where you sort of created your own. What we're trying to do with this is use the experiences of the pandemic to look at how we continue to make education, opportunity, and access more portable. So if my father goes out of the country for 6 months, or if I am homebound with some type of major fracture, all these kinds of things that happened before the pandemic, how can we use that to continue to deliver quality instruction? So the model has 3 major components: instruction, and we will be working with our partners at NCAT to create professional development. And this is one of the areas that everyone in the state will be able to benefit from, be a part of. We will use a badging system and are excited about the opportunity in the modules that we will work with NCAT to prepare. We're also working on high quality lesson content. One more. And we have modules in process, math modules right now, and those are on track. I believe 9 of them for dissemination in July. Our folks are currently working to hire a content lead for the grant, and we will have content specialists as well to help prepare the module work, instructional content as this moves forward. The other area is access, and this is how do we help everyone have opportunity here. Some of the targeted work will be in our 45 Tier 1 counties, and we will also be working on developing capacity in those counties with teacher rock stars, for lack of a better word, that when the money goes away, will still be there and be able to help support their districts. Our number from invitation at this point has gone up as of yesterday to 18 PSUs who have opted in, and our charter recruitment just started. So we sort of did a light touch with these districts, knowing they had ESSER applications and summer learning on their plates. And now we're doing personal contacts with the districts, which we think will help us with questions or concerns that they may have means for them at a time when they have so much on their plates. The awareness part of this grant allows us to, well, I mentioned some of that. Awareness in terms of rolling out. We had hoped to be further along than we are now, teaching districts and supporting districts, but we've had to step back a little bit given everything else that's been going on in the world. We also have learned a lot about bureaucracy with a federal grant in times when your agency is getting millions of dollars and how that processing takes place. So I do need to be transparent about the fact that particularly in hiring positions with non-recurring, this has been a challenge for us. But I'm going to introduce some folks to you in just a minute to show you that we have been successful and we are on our way. So personnel that will be supported by the grant, happy to share with you that we have been able to hire and have in place now, I think about 3, maybe 4 weeks, Melissa Davis. And Melissa is no stranger to you. She has worked with us at North Carolina Virtual Public, I think, 12 years, and brings great organizational leadership and content knowledge to this work. And our project manager is Rachel Junio, and Rachel comes from Standards Curriculum and Instruction. So she has been at the department and will move into this grant manager position. We have postings for regional staff who will, those have closed and the selection process is underway. We also have a content lead, as I mentioned earlier, and those have closed and that selection process is underway. I'm going to stop now and introduce these folks to you just so you can put a name with a face and if they want to just say a few words about themselves. We will be back in September, more detailed outline where we are and what's happened, and they will be the ones you'll get to see in September. So Melissa, and I'll ask you to introduce Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this time to speak. I look forward to our session in September when we can provide you with a few more details around our progress. Just a little about myself. I have served in the last 28 years in the state of North Carolina. I just aged myself a little bit with that comment, I'm sure, but I've served as a classroom teacher, a school administrator, and as Dr. Emery stated, I've worked for the last 12 years with North Carolina Virtual Public School in a leadership position. I'm also a certified master reviewer for Quality Matters, which is an organization that has developed a system for evaluating the quality of online and blended courses. So I hope to bring all of that together to make this program a success. And I am delighted that Rachel has joined us, and I'll give her a moment to speak as well. But thank you all very much. I'll see you in September.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, board members, for this opportunity to talk about this amazing grant that we both have the opportunity to work on. I'm Rachel Wright-Junio. Most recently, I was working for Standards Curriculum and Instruction as an ELA consultant, but much of my experience is with federal programs, specifically with migrant education and Title III. And so I hope to use that experience that I have with those subgroup populations, as well as my extensive experience in our most rural communities, to make this grant very successful. And we look forward to telling you all more in September. Thank you.
Thank you both. Just wrapping up, we have multiple partners in this work. We are working with Epic, who will do our baseline and evaluation for the grant, working with Friday Institute, who are helping us with a needs assessment. And those may be multiple levels, both surveying stakeholder groups, parents, educators, leaders. As we said earlier, NCAT will work with us on professional development, and RTI will help us with specific technical assistance in these districts that sign on and partner with us. So how can they be on the ground helping those lead educators look at innovative ways to blend learning, to work remotely, to take learning and make it portable. The excitement here is that there is not a set evaluation from the federal government here. We have the opportunity to build this and create our own indicators for how we look at impact and effectiveness, which really supports the whole idea here of how do you innovate in a time of crisis and what learning can come out of that that can be replicated across the state. I will stop. Have any questions?
Questions for Dr. Emery? Very exciting program, and like you said, good things are coming out of the difficult period we're slowly emerging from.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And just aside from the content of the Rethink grant, Dr. Emery, I just had to highlight something that you said at the beginning of your presentation, and that is that at a time in which we are dealing with just the incredible opportunity from the ESSER funds and federal funds related to the pandemic, you and your team assembled and chose to go down this path. You all took on an additional challenge of writing a competitive grant in the most competitive category to find additional funds to further provide services to students who have unique needs that might not be typically recognized by some of these other funding sources. I just think it's a testament to the depth of your bench and to the strength of your leadership that you all took on one more challenge despite all of the other many challenges that we have had this past year. And I'm so grateful. And on behalf of all of those children that are going to be served by this, just so grateful that you all didn't say, we've got enough on our plates. We don't need one more thing. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it, but all these people sitting here were in that moment as well as the folks here, and you understand the urgency. And in those moments, we also didn't know. So I appreciate what you're saying, but we also didn't know all these other packages were coming. So in that moment, that urgency was, we need to go after everything we can because we really don't know, or can we predict what impact will be. So thank you for that. Really appreciate the support at this table as well.
Before we move on, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Dr. Emery. We now go to action on first read, SLA 1, which is the K-12 Social Studies Glossary, Crosswalks, and Strand Maps, and K-5 Unpacking Documents for approval. We're close to the end of a very long social studies journey, and it's been a difficult one, to say the least. Over the course of this work, we've gotten several rounds of valuable feedback from educators and families across the state over the last two plus years. Our DPI leadership and the social studies team worked incredibly hard to craft the new standards. While it was a close vote, those standards have been approved and are not part of our discussion today. Today, according to board policy, following standards revision and approval, the social studies team has created a series of supporting documents that can be used as guidance by teachers across the state. My thanks to Superintendent Truitt and the team for their hard work on these documents under a very tight deadline. Our curriculum leaders and teachers throughout the state are eagerly awaiting the materials to assist them in the development of aligned curricula so that they are ready for their students in the 2021-2022 academic year. These documents do not constitute a curriculum. That choice is left up to our local districts and charter schools. They are not requirements. The only requirement is that teachers cover the standards for the grade or course that they are teaching. Because the board is asked to approve the supporting documents, we have before us K-12 glossary, crosswalk and strand maps, as well as the K-5 unpacking documents. The 6-12 unpacking documents will be presented at our July meeting. Dr. Carlin is going to review the process her team has followed and walk us through the various documents, helping us understand how they might be used by teachers. I do want to emphasize that we enter into this discussion with a recognition that our vote tomorrow should not be based on whether we agree with the approved standards, but rather on whether the supporting documents align with the standards. And with that, I think it's Dr. Carlin or Dr. Stegall? Thank you, Dr. Stegall.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. You essentially did my part for me, so I appreciate you. That's exactly right. These are supporting documents to accompany the standards. Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, and distinguished board members, we are here to review the work as has been stated the past 2 years that's been so diligently crafted, has been purposeful and comprehensive around the K-12 social studies standards that were recently approved. Today, we're bringing you the supporting documents for K-12 that accompany these newly adopted standards, and then, as was shared, the K-5 unpacking documents with 6-12 coming in July. I'd like to thank Superintendent Truitt for her role in helping discuss all the perspectives that were brought forward and helping us work through some of these questions and challenges of covering all that's entailed with a K-12 adoption of social studies standards. I also want to thank the team, Dr. Angie Mullinex, who's the Director of K-12 Academics, Dr. Christy Day, who's the Assistant Director of K-12 Academics, and then Dr. Lori Carlin, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, Lori Major Carlin, who's the Section Chief for Social Studies and the Arts. And we'll be sharing in these presentations the unpacking documents and the supporting documents and glossary that go along with it. As Cabinet shared, we will provide an update on the glossary, which is for K-12, strand maps, crosswalks, and then, of course, the unpacking documents for K-5. And again, as was stated, these are supporting documents. Our goal, the goal of the department is to provide teachers with resources, ideas, any support that can maybe help with the development of curriculum that they choose locally to most comprehensively address the standards and help their students understand the standards. And so the purpose of these is to provide that support for the schools and the districts and the teachers. Next slide, please. For all the standards revisions, we know that the departments through state board policy, as was shared, are directed to follow the process outlined here, the 4-step process: review, revise, install, which is where we are now, the installation phase, and then implement, which will start with the 21-22 academic year. Some schools, that's as early as, I believe, July, so right around the corner. We are in the installation phase with implementation starting soon. The professional development that will go along with these will be available to teachers through webinars following the approval of the supporting documents, including the middle and high school documents that are coming to you in July. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Lori Carlin, who is the Section Chief for Social Studies and the Arts, and she'll walk you through Rethink stand. Dr. Carlin.
Thank you, Dr. Stegall. Good morning, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, members and advisors to the State Board. It is my pleasure to be back before you with supporting documents that will assist teachers with the implementation of the social studies standards that this body approved in February. I'm going to walk through examples of each document in just a moment, but before I get there, I'd like to speak to the tremendous contributions of various groups and individuals to this work. The social studies team is comprised of Tom Darty, who's here with me today, Justin Knox, Michelle McLaughlin, and Felicia Sanders, who are listening at home. Typically, these documents are developed over the course of the installation year. This amazing team has worked diligently to produce quality documents in 3 months, and I'm so proud of this work. We were able to contract with several teachers who served on the standards writing teams to provide assistance with content and formative assessment examples. The NCDPI team facilitated this work and provided feedback and edits. An internal DPI team consisting of leadership, cabinet members, and staff outside of the SC&I division was convened to review and provide feedback. We were also able to review the unpacking documents line by line with Superintendent Truitt. Additionally, the glossary, strand maps, and crosswalks were provided in Friday updates to the board. We'll go ahead and begin with the K-12 glossary. The social studies glossary has been designed to be a tool to provide educators with terminologies that represent the big, powerful concepts and ideas that teachers need to know and understand in order to effectively teach the social studies standards and use supporting documents. The glossary will allow district leaders and teachers to build curriculum and lessons around a common understanding of terminology and language, promoting consistency across disciplines. The glossary will provide definitions of terms in the standards that might be difficult to understand due to multiple interpretations or ambiguity. The glossary of terms will also supply more clarifying language with regards to terms that lend themselves to multiple definitions and interpretations. Please keep in mind, the purpose of the glossary is not to rewrite definitions for terms that can easily be found in any standard dictionary and textbook, nor to be an exhaustive list of vocabulary terms. The purpose is to provide a resource that social studies educators can access in order to better understand the intent of terminology used in the objectives in the appropriate context to the disciplines of social studies upon which these courses have been created. Next, we move to strand maps. The strand maps help ensure vertical progression throughout the standards and objectives. The North Carolina Standards for Social Studies are organized around 5 disciplinary strands, which are history, geography, civics and government, economics, and behavioral science. The strand map outlines the vertical progression of objectives written to the strand of each course in the K-12 North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Each strand map is intended to serve as a tool for recognition of the major concepts and understandings students should be expected to know by the end of each grade band and high school course. Next, we move to crosswalks. A crosswalk document is a reference tool educators and stakeholders can use to efficiently compare the changes and differences between 2 sets of standards. This crosswalk document compares the approved 2021 social studies standards to the 2010 social studies standards. This crosswalk can assist educators in the preliminary work required in assessing the differences and similarities in the scope, content, concepts, and skills. The crosswalk is not intended to answer all questions about the nuances of the new standards versus the old standards. While valuable as a reference tool, this crosswalk does not substitute for a deeper, more comprehensive understanding of the social studies standard course of study. There are crosswalks provided for every grade or specific course. And now we move to the K-5 unpacking documents. The unpacking documents are designed to enhance teacher understanding of how to engage with the standards and objectives. As we shared in February, the layout for the unpacking documents remains consistent through K-12. On the far left, the objective is listed, followed by columns for what mastery of the objective looks like, what information students should understand after instruction, what students should know after instruction, and then there are columns for example topics and example formative assessments. These examples are intended to provide teachers with potential topics to use in instruction. It is very important to know that as a local control state, Each school and teacher will make final determinations about which, if any, of these examples to use. The idea is to provide teachers with a starting point, and then they make a professional judgment about how best to engage their students with the material they use to choose for the objective. The example topics and example formative assessments provided with each objective are content examples for instruction that help build student knowledge and understanding of the objective, sample assessment activities to gauge learning that may be used to determine whether students are meeting the learning objective, examples to enhance the student's ability to make connections across other disciplines and in the real world, recommendations with the understanding that PSUs retain local control to assist with determining curriculum. The example topics and example formative assessments provided with each objective are not meant to be an exhaustive list, a checklist for basic memorization, a checklist for assessment for each objective, or summative assessment items. This example for kindergarten comes from the behavioral strand and covers the objective KB 1.2, compare cultural practices of people in local communities and around the world. This first grade example covers objective 1C and G 1.2, exemplify ways individuals and groups contribute to the making of rules and laws. In a developmentally appropriate manner, first grade students will learn about the ways rules are made in their schools and communities. One of the formative assessment examples includes having students come up with examples of rules for how to share, work collaboratively, show respect and responsibility when getting a new toy or a class pet. This second grade example comes from the economics strand and will help students understand how the availability of resources impacts the production of goods. This third grade example comes from the geography strand and will help students understand how geography impacts the development of regions and communities. As a reminder of how these unpacking documents serve as resources and not curriculum or lesson plans, I'd like to share an example of how I used them when I was in the classroom. If I came across an objective that I didn't have familiarity with or didn't fully understand how my students were supposed to use that objective, I would turn to an unpacking document, look at the mastery, look at what students should know after it's finished, and then I look at that list of example topics. Some of them might not work for my kids. Others might be just perfect to spark an interest, something we talked about earlier in the semester, or something that was a current topic or something like that. And so I'd use that to teach the objective. And then beyond that, with the formative assessments, I might use something that was suggested, or I might take those examples and create one of my own. So that's just an idea of how these are not prescriptive. Only the standards and objectives are supported by state mandate. These documents are simply resources to help our teachers find those creative ways to connect their students with the material. As fourth grade standards provide a deeper dive into North Carolina's history and geography, this example provides information about the role North Carolina has played in major conflicts and events throughout the history of America. Example topics include the Revolutionary War, World Wars, and the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, along with others. Teachers could use these example topics or perhaps some from their own regions or local history to connect with this objective. This final example from fifth grade comes from the economic strand and deals with the ways personal financial decisions impact economic growth and decline in the United States. One of the examples of formative assessment suggests that students look at a graph of the stock market crash in 1929 and explain how the financial decisions of the 1920s ultimately led to a period of long-term economic decline. Once again, these unpacking documents are simply provided as a support resource for teachers to draw from. These are not to be mistaken for curriculum or lesson plans. Those are determined on the local level. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Stegall.
Thank you. As was shared, we're requesting action on first reading for the K-12 glossary, strand maps, and crosswalks, as well as the K-5 unpacking documents. This will allow teachers to begin utilizing these in their plans for the next school year. We will return to you in July on first reading for both the professional development plan and additional unpacking documents. Grade 6-8, which includes American history, 6-8 plus American history, world history, economic and personal finance, and civic literacy. So if you have questions, we'd be glad to entertain those and try to answer those if we can.
Questions from around the table or our board members and advisors at home?
A couple of questions,
Dr.
Ms. Chemnitz. Thank you so very much for the presentation, but also for the extra hard work that you have committed to the revision of the standards. That process goes back several months, maybe more than a year. And then I know, I can just imagine all the hard work that you all invested in, including those from the field, teachers from the field and experts in central offices, to creating these documents, these supporting documents that will help the classroom teacher. I have a couple, maybe 3 questions that I don't know whether the questions fall in the category of alignment or just, let me just ask the question. We'll categorize later. I don't see, and I'm looking at the unpacking document for kindergarten B13. And this could be applicable to any of the objectives for that matter. But I don't see any differentiation between the objective and the example of formative assessment. In other words, and I've looked at this not just with regard to kindergarten, but the other grade levels as well. I don't know, maybe the question is, what is the purpose of, a rhetorical question, the purpose of a formative assessment? I know what it's for, it's to inform instruction. But you would think that there would be more of a difference drawn between, let's say, the mastery of the objective, what the student will understand, what the student will know, but definitely there should be something that really speaks to the teacher having a sense of knowing whether or not, to what extent the student has mastered or is mastering the information. So that's my first concern. In other words, the formative assessment, and I understand the point about examples. This is to serve as information and guidance to the classroom teacher to move forward and create his or her own formative assessments. I get that. But there's even from the standpoint of it needing to be a really good example to help the teacher design a formative. I don't see any differentiation. The formative assessment examples look like activities, projects, so on and so forth. And I don't know whether you're going to recommend to the teachers will these formative assessments be rubric driven, or how will a determination be made about progress toward mastery? That's one question.
Sure. So a formative assessment is different than a summative assessment. A formative assessment wouldn't be graded, so we wouldn't look at a rubric situation. It's just a way, as you're going through the lesson, to gauge learning. So these are examples that teachers could take and adapt for their own use. The reason that it does seem exactly like the objective is that we want to be able to tie everything directly back to that objective. So when possible, we were as clean with those connections as possible.
Okay. My other question has to do with your the development of the glossary. Do you have do you have a reference page for the authoritative sources for those terms that are contained within the glossary? I'd like to know more, because the part that troubles me the most about the introduction to the glossary section, it says something like this: the glossary will provide definitions of terms in the standards that might be difficult to understand due to multiple interpretations or ambiguity. Now, that's troubling to me, because I don't know that I would not want students to be confused about the meaning of terms. I appreciate multiple perspectives, epistemology, sources of knowledge, how knowledge is formed. I get all of that, but I think from the standpoint of helping students develop their knowledge of social studies and the concepts around it, I would just want the students to have a more clear understanding of terms, complex terms, abstract terms.
So that's
So could you help me
certainly,
with that?
sure, that's certainly the goal. The definitions that are included in that glossary apply directly to the standards that you all approved in February. So we aren't looking to define those terms the way that they would be used in other places in the world. They are specifically applicable to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. We at one point had cited sources for every one of our definitions. Now, the definitions don't typically come directly from a source. We, as a team and as the group of teachers that advised, we got together and talked about what those words meant in terms of our standards. And so what we are happy to do, I believe we've had some conversation about going back to cite sources for every one of those. So we'll be happy to provide that information.
Okay. And then my final question has to do with, actually, it's one of the frames in your presentation. It has to do, well, go back one, previous one. So I'm reading that to mean only one term will be, that says NA under the glossary template. What does that mean?
There aren't any glossary terms that apply to that particular objective. If you look at any of the others, there are some words that are applicable to the objectives, and some objectives didn't need any definitions, or those words had already been defined in other grades, in like kindergarten through third grade.
Okay, maybe that needs to be clarified rather than NA, the help for the teachers' benefit, or maybe that's going to be clarified in PD.
Sure.
That's misleading. I think that's it. Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Other questions? Right?
I would just like to hear from superintendent on and evaluating, since we had extensive discussion and significant dissent on the standards. I heard the conversation that this is a very separate. I'd love to hear about your role in looking through, evaluating, speaking to the development of these documents as they're being presented today.
Thank you for that opportunity, Ms. White. I would say that the process was one of a lot of back and forth. The documents lived in a Google Drive, so there was always instant access to those documents, to the documents that are attached to the presentation, the 5 different pieces. There were, I would say the majority of my recommendations for changes that were made were, excuse me, in the example topics column. I found that the early drafts of this unpacking document contained much more specificity than in the past, or as compared to other subject unpacking documents, for example, ELA. And so we removed some specificity at my request. I would also say that when I first looked at the earliest drafts, there were not the level of diverse example topics that I wanted to see. For example, there were a disproportionate number of topics for any given standard and objective that had to do with one community over another. So I asked the team to go back and have more proportionality of topics to go with specific standards and objectives. I would like to say that I agree with Dr. Oxendine's comments about the necessity of citing the sources for the glossary terms, because as Dr. Carlin pointed out, they came from a variety of sources. And I think that knowing that these definitions were the sum total of several different sources, I think it's important for our teachers to know that while they might not be able to consider all of these definitions, the definitive of that term, that there absolutely needs to be sources cited for, not at the end of the document, but for each term. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Other comments, questions?
I do have, thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and thank you, board members, for watching me. I have a lot to say about this topic. It's near to me. The knowledge that our students will need to gain from social studies, that is. Now, I think I heard maybe you say that the unpacking documents for the upper grades, like grade 6 and above, will come next month, perhaps, or in the near future. I do, bear with me for a moment, because I picked up on something in going through these documents that pertain to 6-8. And I don't want to put you on the spot because you may not be ready to answer until next month, but let me ask it anyway. It has to do with the theme of innovation, grade 6-8. It's in the column, innovation is somewhere in the column. And it discusses, to me, not a thorough enough list of innovations. For instance, I would think innovation would include something about the great inventors of the early 20th century, the Fords, the Boeing, the Wright brothers, let's see, who else? The skyscraper era, the Mohawk skywalkers that balanced on the beams of the Empire State Building, the Indian. I would think that we would have something about, okay, you can tell I taught social studies, so I'm into this. The Dwight D. Eisenhower era of the interstate highway system out of the post-World War II period, and what that has done to open up travel across this country, how it plays into major infrastructure. What does the term infrastructure mean? 6th grade students need to know that. On and on. So please, the TDA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the rural co-ops that we have in North Carolina, the coming on of electricity. I mean, I could just go on. The civil rights era of the 1960s and how that led to the Great Society. Okay, it goes, I mean, I'm going to stop now because I'm getting too excited. I'm ready to teach. But please tell me that we aren't finished with that part of 6-8.
Yes, ma'am. What you've seen are the strand maps. So that exact, what you're referring to is not the unpacking document. Those are very general terms. When we develop the unpacking document for 6th grade, those things are very clearly spelled out. And if you look at 5th grade, which you guys before you today, we do have one about innovation, where innovation is defined, and then lots of those examples that you just gave are already present in the 5th grade. And as we work to develop that 6th grade version, those will be included as well. So we don't have the 6th grade document before you today. What you've been looking at is the strand map. So those are much more general.
So I will see those topics.
I will interject, as we just heard just a moment ago, there's that balance between specificity and broad examples.
Hang on.
I don't want to get into that specificity. I don't know where that ends. There's always going to be a topic or a specific example that might not be covered. And so what the team has done is given example topics and various groups and various backgrounds and various examples, knowing there's tens of thousands.
Absolutely. I understand that. We had that discussion sometime, maybe a year ago. I think Mr. Ford brought that up in the discussion about being more explicit with terms and words and concepts in the standard. So we dealt with that. And I hope we will go back to that approach because I know we've got a lot in there, rightfully so, on contributions of women. I know the names that I brought up are men, and they're white men, but they still are heroes in the in the narrative of America. And I'm not saying that we're trying to avoid that. I just feel like I just feel the need to raise that up, because these are such rich topics, and our students are going to be deprived. They aren't presented.
Some of the, to your examples, teachers like yourself and myself as teachers, they will determine specific examples that they have, feel like maybe impact their students, or teaching these topics with 1,000 different examples. So you're exactly right. It's good to make sure we don't want to leave anything out, but by creating a list can never be so exhaustive that you might run the risk of leaving.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Camnett.
Superintendent.
Yeah, and to your point, Dr. Oxendine, I would like to reiterate that regardless of whether or not a specific person or event is included in the example topic column, is absolutely no guarantee that a teacher is going to choose to teach that sample topic alongside that objective.
Sad.
Ms. White.
One final question. Several months ago in our discussion about standards, I made a comment from the table about the foundation of our social studies curriculum being anchored in the thought and the premise that America is a great nation. And is there any place for inclusion in that foundation as a preamble to all of these documents together, that we are educating our students about our history, both positive and negative, but that through our challenges, through sacrifices, through our triumphs, that America is the nation today that we should be proud of and blessed to live in an effort to help our students better understand about their role as future leaders in this nation. And I really think that a document or a statement underlining that fact that our teachers teaching in the public schools should be making every effort to help our students understand our history as it impacts the socioeconomics, diversity, economic development, and future development of this country. It's important that we undergird that with the idea that we live in a tremendously prosperous land. Is there a place for that?
The preamble that was written for the standards will precede all of these documents. So it is an inclusion on the website currently, and where all of these will live, that preamble lives as well.
That be before us for revision as we adopt.
I believe that was part of what we approved in February.
Yeah, it was approved.
Chair Davis.
Ms. White, I believe, if I understand correctly, you're asking for such a statement to be added to these unpacking documents in order to sort of set the tone for what we hope to accomplish by these unpacking documents.
But perhaps include the preamble in the.
Or a statement along the lines of Ms. White's comments as a preamble to the unpacking documents. Perhaps, Ms. Camnett, your committee and staff could reflect on that suggestion and come back to us.
Yes, and then we could do that easily at our July meeting.
Yes.
Other questions before we move on?
Really quick, this is Mr. Ford, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ford.
I want to apologize for the spotty internet connection at my location. So if I fall out, that's the reason why. This is again a process question. To Superintendent Truitt, you mentioned in the drafting and the updating of the supporting documents that there were some example topics that you said were either too specific or didn't represent proper diversity with quote one community over another. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? What community specifically you felt like were creating the imbalance or disproportionality?
Yes, let me refer to my notes, Mr. Ford, if I have them with me.
Do you need a minute, Superintendent?
Yes, please.
Mr. Ford, if you don't mind, I'm going to let Mr. Bristow Smith pop in while Superintendent Truitt works to find what the answers to the question you just asked.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Ms. Cammett, and thank you, Dr. Carlin, Dr. Segal, Dr. Walnick, and your entire team. This is just really a perspective from the field and not really pertinent to any of the previous remarks. But I just wanted to thank you for the. It is early noon, and I'm a practitioner in the field, and I'm going to be teaching new curriculum, the new standard in August. I'm going to use my summer standards and to go through all of these documents and to make sure that I'm ready in August to deliver a world-class education to my social studies students. And the timing of this is really important. And so sometimes in development of standards and unpacking documents and such, we sometimes forget that their implementation has a cycle. And I'm grateful that these are being brought to us in early June rather than in early August, which would put every teacher in the field on their heels to implement with fidelity this work. So I just wanted to elevate this time, and how grateful I am that you guys put up a line in the sand and said you're going to bring it to the board, that you brought it with teachers and students in mind. Thank you.
Ms. Camness, I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you. So on May 3rd of this year, I am looking at notes right now that refer specifically to standard AH.B.1.6, which is experiences and achievements of minorities and marginalized peoples. What I wrote down is that all of the examples of reading assignments and topics, because at this time I was looking at a column that included links to reading assignments. All examples of reading assignments and topics to cover are with regards to African American culture, except for one, and that was the Navajo Code Talkers. Excuse me, there was nothing about European discrimination of various groups, anti-Semitism, Asian slavery, etc. AH.B.1.7, which is experience and achievements, I believe, and examples of slavery, xenophobia, disenfranchisement, and intolerance have affected ... There were 17 suggested resources listed. Only one had to do with the Jews, one had to do with Asian Indian culture, one was Chinese, one was LGBTQ, the remainder were African American topics. In AH.CNG.1.4, explain how racism, oppression, discrimination of indigenous peoples, racial minorities, and other marginalized groups have impacted equality. There were 25 example topics. 2 were LGBTQ, 13 were African American, 1 was religious, 7 were American Indian, 2 had to do with gender. That's the disproportionality that I was referring to.
And just for clarity, Dr. Carlin, I think that those are not before us yet. Those were from the American History.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? So just to avoid any confusion around the table,
Right.
we have not yet had access to that.
You are correct. And we've also fixed that.
Thank you. No, that's the answer to my question. Thank you.
All right, hearing no other questions, thank you so much, Dr. Carlin, Mr. Gall. SLA 2, also action on first read, is State Board of Education Policy Amendment, Graduation Certificates and Participation for Students with Disabilities. Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here with all of you and all of the team. It's been wonderful. So today, Dreamer McCoy is going to come up with you and share with you some updates. We are still, like you said, Ms. Camnitz, on the social studies journey, and with the adding of the legislation of economics and personal finance, after you all approved the extended content standards. Right then, we should have brought this to you, and we apologize with everything else going on, but we need to update those graduation requirements for our extended content. And then that way, it'll all be in alignment. We've also, as you'll see in the policy, we cleaned up some of the language. It was something that we hadn't looked at in a while and really wanted to make sure that things were clean, very similar to the other graduation policies. So families and teachers and districts and our great principals could see that and better understand. So Dreama will walk through the specifics now.
Good morning, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, and the members of the board. First of all, I'd like to say it is awesome to be able to see everybody back in person. I've listened intently to all of the state board meetings, but to be able to see you guys, it's really exciting. So thank you. So as Sneha has already indicated, the need for making this change with the graduation policy. As a reminder, Sherry Thomas, our Director of Exceptional Children, presented this information in February at the board meeting. The students must have an individualized education program, and the disability significantly impacts intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior. We're talking about students who are on the extended content standards, those who are significantly cognitively impaired, and their adaptive behavior is defined as actions that are essential for an individual to live independently and to function safely in daily life. So the students who have significant cognitive impairments require extensive direct instruction, individualized instruction, and substantial supports to achieve measurable goals and gains on the challenging state academic content standards for the grade in which the student is enrolled. And so, as previously indicated, this economic personal finance course was presented by the North Carolina Standard Course of Study in 2019 as legislated. And so we are now again bringing this information today for the grad policy. And so when we take all students, when the legislators indicated all students, we take that to heart as all students. Next slide, please. So with the Every Student Succeeds Act, the extended context standards and the objectives of the economic personal finance course will provide students the opportunity to engage in intensive application of the skills, concepts, processes, and knowledge gained in previous social study courses and prepare students for employment and civic ready. The students with significant cognitive disabilities will be able to possess a fundamental knowledge and understanding of the basic principles of economic and money management, apply knowledge to real life examples, and participate in their own financial literacy. They also will demonstrate knowledge necessary to live in and contribute to a financially sound society to the fullest extent possible. Within the Every Student Succeeds Act, our academic achievement standards describe how students are expected to learn in order to be proficient. And again, these are our students who are on the alternate assessment and who are participating on the extended content standards. ESSA clearly states that the IEP team must make that determination for a student to have a significant cognitive disability. And this is also capped at 1% within our state. Slide, please. So our proposed graduation change is to add the extended content standards for economic and personal finance as stipulated by the House Bill 924 to the grad policy 010 or the certificate requirement under social studies. We'd like to increase the social studies credit that is currently in our policy from 3 to 4, therefore again aligning up with our North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Next slide, please. So again, that policy change, as you'll see, as Sneha indicated, we have made a few additional changes just in order, again, to continue that alignment and to ensure that there's clarity provided within our extended content standards. So you'll see the names of those particular social studies courses that are identified, which are civics, economics and personal finance, and 3 of the following 4 courses. Civics and Governance 1, Civics and Governance 2, American History 1, and or American History 2. Are there any questions?
Questions for Ms. McCoy? Vice Chair Duncan?
I'm a little confused. I thought we had eliminated American History 1 and 2 and just had American History.
So that is
can you
actually,
explain that?
yes, that is correct. So normally when we are doing extended content standards, they extend from 1 year past where the original North Carolina Standard Course of Study has already been completed. So we are in the process now of making all those social studies changes, as well as any additional changes once it's passed by state by the state board. So as the social studies previously was just presented, we'll extend 1 year from today around the time
So
period.
this is evolving year by year right now.
Correct.
So in 22-23, Mr. Duncan, you'll have the one American history course. Right now, there's some development for that. So these are 1 year behind. But personal finance, if you recall, had the law with the specific date. So we need to go ahead and get EPS.
I could have two follow-up questions then. One is there a reason world history is not listed as one of those credits?
It will be in the 22-23.
Okay, and then the last question comes from slide 4. So the last point said ESSA determined the cap for students instructed towards alternate academic achievement standards at 1% of total assessed population. I understand if I ask where did that come from, you can say ESSA, but what is the basis from ESSA of designating only 1% as it may relate to our student population? Is there some analysis of our student population, or is that just a number?
That is any number that for those students who are tested. And so, we actually in Exceptional Children have asked that question over and over, where'd the 1% come from? But if you remember in statistics, when you have that bell curve and you have the tail on the end, so they're indicating that 1% of the students who are significantly intellectually impaired or cognitive disabled would be those students who would be participating.
Morning. If I can just add one piece to that. We wouldn't expect more than about 1% of our population of students to be in those students with significant disabilities group that are being used, are using an alternate assessment. So it is protection in some ways. That's an easy place to misuse removal in the standard curriculum, for lack of a better word. And so it's statistically been about 1% that we should see nationwide.
So I understand ESSA would be nationwide. Does that match up with our students' population so we feel comfortable?
We are over. Dr. Tammy Howard came before you with that waiver around the 1%. We are working really hard to get our districts back under that 1%. I think we're at about 1.2
or 1.4.
Somewhere in there, 1.2, 1.1.
1.1.
Okay, we've made progress. So we were at about 1.2. So we're at 1.1% of our population right now in that alternate assessment. But to be on that assessment, they must be in this curriculum pathway. And that's the part we're really trying to stay on top of.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you, Ms. McCoy. You coming back to us? Yeah.
All right, to SLA 3 and SLA 4 are very closely related. I think Dr. Mullenix is going to walk us through both of these, just in case we're thinking that after next month, we're going to take a break from standards. We are not.
We are definitely not going to take a break from standards. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board. Today, I come before you on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Superintendent of Innovation, and I'm so pleased that today I also Assistant Director of Standards Curriculum, Dr. our Section Chief for Specialized Support and Help Schools, and Ms. Beverly Vance, our Section Chief for Math, Science, and STEM. So I'm so pleased that they're here with us today. Go ahead, go to the next slide. So as Ms. Kamnitz mentioned, this is going to be on behalf of SLA 3 and 4. They've been combined into one presentation. They are separate content area standards. I just want to distinguish that. So we'll provide a brief overview of where we're at with the revision process and the review phase, and I'll explain those phases again as Dr. Stegall mentioned them back when we talked about social studies. We're going to be looking at science and healthful living. Healthful living includes health education and physical education. So here on this graphic, you see our process for standards revision. It is based on implementation science. We begin with the review phase, and that is a phase where it is an unofficial phase in that we have not sought permission at this or sought permission at this point. We are really looking at research and trying to gather information about what other states are doing with their standards revision process, and of course, the research that guides those content areas. So we are currently in the review phase for both content areas. Today, we are seeking permission to begin the revision process. That will bring us to phase 2, as you see on there. And then after we, and I'll give you guys the timeline here in just a little bit. After we complete the revision process, then we would move into installation. Installation, as you heard with social studies, is where we work on those supporting documents and also provide professional development to the field and the teachers who will use those supporting documents. And then implementation is when those teachers will actually be using those standards in the classroom. So our standard course of study policy 012 says that we should revise our standards about every 5 to 7 years. I will provide a timeline for where we have been previously, but just as an overview, we are about nearing almost a decade since we have revised these 2 content area standards. So please keep those in mind. As I mentioned, both content areas are currently in the review phase, and both section chiefs are working diligently with their teams to gather research and data about their content areas so that upon approval to begin the revision process, we can jump right into that. And you see the timeline there for revision would be the 21-22 timeframe. So after you approve, moving forward to 2022, installation would be 2022 to 2023. And then implementation would be fall of 23 to 24. We have 4 focus areas that guide us along our process for this. And these are our guideposts that we make sure we adhere to. We adhere to our communication and visibility. Those are very essential. We like to maintain transparency in this process. We also adhere to professional development. Not only do we write these standards, work with our teachers to write these standards and approve these standards and supporting documents, but we make sure that we follow through that process of helping them to use those standards as well in the classroom. And then after that, we provide coaching and technical assistance. That is an ongoing process. That can be several years out from implementation. And then, of course, as I mentioned, research and evaluation always guides our standards revision process. A key piece to this, as you mentioned with social studies, is stakeholder involvement. We like to ensure that we are including diverse perspectives and voices when we are revising these standards. Our teachers revise these standards. But aside from that, as you heard with social studies, we also gather input from our DPI staff and colleagues and other stakeholder groups to ensure that we're being inclusive and thoughtful as we revise these standards and the documents that support. And then, and I mentioned the timeline to you there previously, the 2012, 2013 was for both science and healthful living. So to date, you see this progress chart up here. From August 2020 to May of 2021, we have been working on analyzing current research on standards. And you see those 3 bulleted items down there. Those are in policy for us to ensure that we are being thoughtful of reviewing the standards of other states and nationally developed standards, reviewing changes to national frameworks and advanced placement courses, ACT, SAT, and determining changes to UNC system requirements and federal civil rights crosswalks. And then from August 2020 through ongoing, assessing the readiness, establishing district level standards liaison teams, and working with those teams so that they understand the process that they'll go through as these standards are revised and implemented, surveying the field on the current standard course of study. That helps us to understand what pieces of the current standards would need to remain. We also work alongside General Assembly and some other stakeholder groups who help us to understand those key pieces that need to be included in our North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And finally, ongoing an analysis of data to inform recommendations throughout the review process. So in closing, we come before you today to request permission from the State Board to move forward with the revision process for K-12 Science, which is SLA 3, and K-12 Healthful Living, which is SLA 4, and that includes health education and physical education. If that is approved, we will begin that revision process immediately, and then you see there installation and implementation timelines.
Thank you, Dr. Mullenix. Any questions?
Thank you.
Our final action on first read is SLA 5, appointments to the Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. Ms. Thomas.
Good morning again. You have before you an item for nominations for members of our Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. There are two nominees that are on for reappointment. We currently have two other vacancies, one for a parent of a child with a disability and one for an educator. And then we are in the process of also working through our legislative appointments. You'll see that there's still vacancy under the senator appointee and then a parent appointed by the senators, as well as we need to renew the representative appointees there. So what I would like to ask today is that you go ahead, if you would, and approve, the request is to approve these two reappointments, Diane Coffey, who is a parent of a child with a disability, and Christy Hutchinson, who represents charter schools. They've both done an outstanding job on the council and are eligible to be reappointed for another term that would end on June 30th, 2025. And then we are working, we have some recommendations for those other parent vacancies and educator vacancies, but we're waiting on some resumes. So we'd like to come back if that's agreeable to the July board with those and the legislative appointments as well.
So we would be voting to reappoint two.
Correct.
Okay. Questions about that? Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Sure.
Moving to consent items. Excuse me, I skipped something. Excuse me, SLA 6, Governor's School Board, Governor's School Board of Governors appointment recommendations. Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Yeah, so this is a continuation with Sherry here. We're still in tandem of transition from with Governor's School, which is, by the way, going great, all that planning. But we do bring to you Superintendent Truitt's choice for the remaining Board of Governors slot, which is Lyndon Cummings. Lyndon Cummings is from Hope County, is currently the AIG director there, have served on the NCAGT board. The North Carolina Association for Gifted and Talented brings a voice that we need from that part of the state, working with some of our more low-income students.
That's pretty cool that they got this.
Questions? Thank you, Ms. Shaw Coltrane. SLA 7, CTE, the CTE entrepreneurial experience, Mr. Michael.
Why don't you give somebody
Did hear about this wonderful new option for our students from him.
Oh, thank you.
We get this sorted out. We will move on to SLA 8, North Carolina Academically and Intellectually Gifted Program Standards Update. Ms. Shaw Coltrane. Oh, she's just.
She went together.
All right, we are stymied. So.
There we are.
We ready? Mr. Michael. Sneaking in.
Sorry, we're pontificating and thinking about how to solve other problems out in the hallway. Good morning. So this is our entrepreneurial experience, and I don't know that there were any questions since the last time that we met, but I'm happy to entertain any if you do at this point.
Further questions for Mr. Michael on this wonderful opportunity for our students? Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Back to solving the problems.
Definitely.
Ms. Shaw Coltrane, we are now to you, SLA 8.
Good morning, board, again. Today I have with me two incredible team members, Cyrus and Beth Cross as well, in case you have any specific questions that they can answer about specific practices. I'm just going to give a little bit of a review of these standards so we can all make sure we're on the same page. These standards really provide the framework for local AIG plans to be written every 3 years by law. And in the law, the state board provides guidelines. So these standards are the framework that every school district responds to, but in their own way, similar to the standards of the student academic standards. How a district determines to serve and identify students that are academically or intellectually gifted is a local decision. It is determined by the local Board of Education or the charter school board. I just want to, so these are larger statements, conceptual things that then a school district determines how to best do that. As a reminder, the purpose of these revisions were to clarify and ensure our stakeholders and our districts understand the meaning clearly, to update with best practices. There's always new research out there and new information. And 3, to integrate our equity and excellence work. And as you all know, with our call to action, we are focused on both equity and excellence to ensure that we continue to meet the needs of all students in our classroom, and in particular those who have outstanding potential. I want to give you, if you don't mind, a couple of examples of stories of things that are happening in the districts to show you what the reason is for these standards. One of them is, for example, when we say, let's look at the data and the patterns and the trends. We are doing that ourselves to model, and we'll help our districts in the fall do this. And what we have found is that we have in AP programming, we have a few hundred EC children in AP programming. Wow, not nearly enough, but still, wow. Turns out approximately 10% of those are only identified as gifted. What that means as a pattern and as a trend, what is going on? Could we have caught those kids earlier? What systems are in place? What are our own ways of looking at these children? How can we develop better systems to catch students who need advanced programming earlier? For example, another student story. We have our math law, the advanced math law in North Carolina is one of our 5 major policies that ensure gifted education is going nowhere in our state. We are so grateful for having these policies and these laws. With our advanced math law, the very first year that it was established, one district called us, and I always get the district's name right, so I'm not going to say it. Stephanie laughs at me every time because I always get it wrong. But they had a handful of students who had gotten a level 5 on an EOG. All of a sudden, they realized that majority of them but one were all English learners. We realized that those students we needed, that was a catch, which is great. But let's also look at, what can we do to better find those students earlier and seek out talent? Another story is to ensure that the Go Grow program, that some of you that have been here over the years, we had Pitt County come and talking about how they worked with Title I to get additional funding, to have an AIG specialist in their Title I school that had no identified gifted students. Through that program, they have increased all areas of identification. They have low-income students of all backgrounds in that school. So the idea of this whole initiative is, how are we ensuring that all of our students are being tapped, are given the opportunities to grow, develop their talent, and if needed, provided additional services for that. It is absolutely imperative that we make sure that the students who walk into our buildings reading Harry Potter in kindergarten, we immediately see their needs and we serve them. It's also imperative that we ensure that the student who comes in, and when I worked and did a grant work out in Edgecombe, there was a kindergarten boy that I worked with who they had this that little school on the left when you take 2 turns by the railroad tracks. And I remember how to get there.
Princeville Elementary School.
Yes, who said? Princeville. Thank you, Matt. That's exactly right. At Princeville. Thank you. That's going to help me in all my storytelling. Always have my back. Yes, they do have big oak trees out there. So Princeville. So at Princeville, this little boy was telling me how he could tell all of the train schedule. He had figured out the train schedule and was like, do you know? And he had this whole thing figured out that it's every 6 minutes or whatever the minutes were. This was like 20 years ago, but this has been my life's work, right? And so, but he had figured this out. I want to be able to capture, we want to be able to capture that student at Princeville as well. We want to capture the student who will walk in reading at Harry Potter, meet their needs, absolutely, and do that, but also the student who can show us their best in a different way. That Princeville young boy who had figured out may not necessarily be able to read Harry Potter, so we may not give that child a 5th grade book to read, but I can definitely give that child something else to ensure his potential is developed. So I just wanted to make sure that and share with you all a reminder of our work for the call to action as well as these standards today. The standards we bring to you today did have 4 additional changes from what we presented last month. They are bright blue in your table if you're interested in those. And if you have any further questions, we have the team here to respond.
Thank you, Michelle Coltrane. Any other questions? Any questions? Ms. White.
So thank you for the presentation and your enthusiasm. It's so contagious. Over the past, board members I know over the past couple of days have had a multitude of emails and a misunderstanding of what's being presented here today. So I want to offer you the opportunity to provide some clarity. One of the ideas that's being circulated is that the decision today would eliminate the academically gifted program for the state of North Carolina. Can you correct that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. White. Absolutely not. This would not eliminate gifted and talented education programming. In fact, in our state, we have 4 significant laws and your own policy that would not ever allow us until there was a major change in that policy. We're actually one of the states that has the strongest infrastructure and policies. We've been cited in reports a couple of years ago, Jack Book and some others, talking about how we have the strongest foundation for gifted education. So this will not dismantle. In fact, this will increase services in that we want to provide a more diverse range of services for children. Please.
So one other thing that was shared through written communication from parents across the state was that perhaps the standards for identification for students who would qualify for AIG services would be diminished or would be reduced. The qualifying rate would be reduced. Can you help those who are listening today understand that? And I did hear you say that those decisions about how students are identified are done at the local level, but can you speak to that to just, again, just.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. White, for this opportunity. Absolutely. So the criteria for identification of AIG students is a local determination. Nowhere in Standard 1 have we diminished any type of criteria, nor do we set the criteria at the state level. The beauty of our law, Article 9B, whose anniversary is this year of 25 years, was forward thinking in that we want Principal Clemens and Principal Bristol Smith to be able to determine in their districts what is the criteria for those students locally. By no means are we diminishing. Like we said, the child who reads Harry Potter that walks in, we need to provide those services. what we're trying to do is expand our view to know that talent can be seen in multiple ways. But depending on the service, we want to make sure the service matches the identification.
One finals. Thank you for, one of the other ideas is that this is just a general statement. How about that? If our state is going to direct millions of dollars aimed at our lowest performing students, it is also our responsibility and our great privilege to also direct funding towards our state's most academically gifted students, because we must keep up with the other nations that have students that are heavily focused on science, math, technology. And so would you say that your department's philosophy is to provide the support and direct funding so that our state's most gifted students have every opportunity to have the best access to quality courses as we can provide?
With every cell in my body. Yes, ma'am. We are very fortunate in North Carolina to actually have one of the top funded states of the entire country, if not the top funded. I hear Texas anyway recently changed their funding model. Between Governor School, where we have our brightest 700 or so students, between Career and College Promise, AP, AIG Direct, funding of close to 80 million. We do, in fact, do our best. Always could have more funding, always can have more teachers. But yes, I believe we are doing all that we possibly can to provide our most academically or intellectually gifted students the services they deserve. We've also been recognized for all of our work nationally. I have been invited for a signature session at the national convention and even at the World Conference. They feel like we need to come share our work in our state for both equity and excellence.
If I could just piggyback on that, again, we have put a very strong value around this table on equity, and it is just as it is an inequity for children who are ready to soar and who need to move more quickly. To not provide them with that opportunity is inequitable. Superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Kamitz. And to that, I would add that the definition of equity, of educational equity, is giving all students what they need when they need it. And that includes academically gifted children, as you have shown in your presentation today.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Just a further, there's actually an interesting and good intersection out of this conversation as well. The needs of our most accomplished students are, as everyone has said, they are also needs that need to be addressed from an equity standpoint. And if we don't give them the level of rigor that they require and need, then we are disserving those students and disserving society ultimately in the development of their brain power and moving forward and their productivity. I think, and you would, I think, verify this, Dr. Shaw-Coltrane, is that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that students that we sometimes refer to as students who are in failing schools or in schools that are struggling, if we expose them, we expose those students to things like AP examinations, to more advanced math examinations. There's a lot of studies out there that would suggest even if a student doesn't pass an AP exam, if a student was able to take an AP exam, that enhances their ability to go to college and be successful. So there's a great intersection here that can affect all students, and I think we all should be looking for the long term at ways that we can positively affect all of our students and help across the board our students to be at a high level and have the level of rigor they deserve.
And Mr. Duncan, and that is one of the largest, one of our 6 critical actions is talent development. And just like in AP, we've said, well, let's remove barriers, right? Let's take away the funding. We've talked about this at the board table many times. Let's give more professionalism. Similarly, in kindergarten through 5th grade, we need to seek out students who, one, we can see easily need something different, but also go that extra step to find those students and cultivate potential of students that will be harder to find in the school setting at the early age. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for also your enthusiasm. It gets me going. So here I go again. So to the point about local control and local decision-making around eligibility, I'm looking at the table with regard to the standards. It is 6, it's standard 6, and it's further down under E. The third column removes the performance component.
Sure.
So talk to that a bit, because if there is a performance component removed, I think the locals would pick up on that.
Yeah. So we're going to explain that because we knew that's a concern, and then some of the.
Right. So I think the key here is that where you see that being removed is in standard 6,
Right.
which is about program accountability.
Okay.
So in standard 6 is all about all the different data points we collect to determine if the services that we're providing are then effective in meeting the student needs. And so one of the things we see in the old standard 6, D and E, they both talked about collecting data around student performance. And in our conversations with coordinators, what they felt like was that that's repetitive. They addressed how they collected data in standard 6 practice D, and then it was repeated again in standard 6 practice E. They felt like that was duplicate information. So in order to streamline that, what we did was we made sure that the new 6D talks about collecting all achievement and growth data to help you understand if the services you're providing are supporting the student needs. And now in 6E, we're looking at access and opportunity data. So who are the students being referred, to your point,
right,
being identified, being served, and retained in gifted services? So standard 6 is about program accountability. It's not about individual students eligible or showing a need for gifted service. So the concern then is look at standard 1, which is all about student identification. And if you'll look at standard 1 practice B, that's where schools and districts outline the criteria that they look at, the data that they collect to see, is a student showing a need for gifted services? And specifically look at practice 1B. There are no changes there. In fact, we talk about gathering evidence to reveal students' aptitude, their achievement, and their potential to achieve. That hasn't changed. Standard 6, program accountability, we're just being a little more concise in the data we gather and how we speak about that, how we evaluate that to determine if the program is effective.
Excellent. That's a very good explanation. I do have a couple of follow-ups.
Pointing that out.
Absolutely, because it really, it began resonating, or I began thinking about it with the barrage of emails that we received yesterday, and then I picked up on it reading over the information last night, so I made myself a note to ask about performance. The other question has to do with, okay, so this is academic giftedness. How do we identify the giftedness in, let's say, music, art, and provide services and accommodations and differentiation for that type of giftedness?
So our state law does not look at other areas outside of academic. However, there are some districts who are treading into that, and we hope to develop that more as our team has grown, and even with the governor's staff coming and how the governor's school meets those needs. How can we bring that a little bit more into the school year? But our law does not specifically state that, but we do support our districts who want to start going in that. Again, they can add to this. But in our law, it's academic or intellectual. There are a couple of other states that have. Louisiana does a phenomenal job with musical talent and other artistic talents.
See, we could really get into that with honors classes, for instance, in music and art and drama.
So we do offer, and we'll be bringing you a policy in the next 6 months about honors. We do offer advanced honors courses, AP courses, IB courses, dual enrollment courses in all of those areas. We just don't have a specific law that says with AIG. But if you were to put all of our work together, absolutely. We have high-level courses and differentiated courses in art that are actually inherently honors. We have that in world languages, in music, other areas. So yes, we do have those services.
Because that is really going to open up the possibilities to diversify all the pipelines.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. Then my last question has to do with helping the classroom teacher be very vigilant and paying attention for signs of giftedness. For the AIG program, is that done through professional development?
Yes, it's done through professional development. Well, like you've heard us talk about, it's done through all three mindsets, policies, and practices. So today we're talking about the policy, how we have specifically put to one, about making sure every student has an ability to show their strengths. Superintendent Truitt and I were just talking about this recently, how it's not just about a parent advocate or a teacher who may only, from experience sake, may not see a child necessarily in that. We give every student the opportunity, whether it be a universal screener or whatever other mechanism, this idea of having those students pop up. I remember myself in the classroom in second grade, somebody said, "Oh my gosh," specifically remember this young girl, Shamika, who gosh, she's probably 20 something now, Shamika. And it was like, oh my God, this child got a 99 on a cognitive assessment. And Shamika, imagine if catcher. So absolutely, Dr. Oxendine, it takes professional development, it takes policies, and it takes practices. And our guidebook is one of the many steps we're doing to show examples of how this can be done.
Thank you very much. Superintendent Truitt.
And to piggyback on what you've stated, Ms. Shaw Coltrane, in my experience, especially with middle school children, some of the most classic signs of being AIG, unfortunately, especially in boys, is not doing any work, a complete lack of interest in what is going on in school. They tend to not be pleasers. And I'm defining things broadly, but this is, 13 years in the classroom, this was my experience 100%. Very, very rarely did I have children who were going above and beyond in their schoolwork. Let me rephrase that. There were many children who, if I had just looked at their effort and their ability to get work in on time and their ability to effervesce about school, I would never have identified any of them as AIG because was not typical behavior, especially for adolescents.
So we work a lot with non-teacher pleasing behaviors and teacher pleasing behaviors, right? I mean, you can look at our juvenile justice system, or wherever, where a lot of those students were students we missed and didn't, really help them thrive early. And so that's what all of this is about, is helping all of our students thrive and to ensure that the students who need something different, we are doing that to look at it from multiple perspectives.
As was stated, I think by Ms. White earlier, we have all received a copious amount of communication over the last couple of days expressing some concerns about this item. And so actually I'm thankful because it has given us an opportunity to clarify some of these questions and confusion, and the questions have also helped with that. So hopefully now we have made this clear that there is nothing to fear from what we are about to vote on tomorrow, that this is only going to make us stronger. So thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you for the work all of you do. Thank you so much. Briefly to consent items, SLA 9, report to the North Carolina General Assembly, schools for students with visual and hearing impairments. This is a routine report to the General Assembly that is sort of interesting. And it's, do you want to just quickly, Ms. Thomas, explain what this report is communicating to the general assembly?
Absolutely. Good morning again, and I'm going to ask our section chief for sensory support and assistive technology, which is where the work for the visually impaired and the hearing impaired lives, to come up with me, because she really manages this. The General Assembly required this report, which was to send out a survey to parents asking if they would like, parents of children who are deaf, hard of hearing, or visually impaired. Let me get the qualifier there. Districts are required to send out this form to ask if they would like their name shared with the residential schools. And so this is the reporting of that, of the responses from the survey. And it was legislated. It's been managed at this point by the Exceptional Children Division, because there was really nowhere else for this to live, or no one else to do this. And sincere apologies, because we just missed getting this to you at the end of last year, which is when it should have come before. The information's been shared, but we just didn't get it to you. I don't know how long we can play the COVID card, but it seems like there were a few more other urgent items, and we just missed this on the schedule. So our apologies.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Do you have anything to add here to that?
All right, thank you. If there are no questions, thank you very much. We'll
Thank you.
quickly, SLA 10. We have had quite a few of these recommendations to approve over the last few months, but this is another high school accreditation recommendation for Bertie Early College High School in Bertie County. And I will just add that in committee, as we discussed this, it was shared with us that on all indicators, this school was above the state average. So we should have no concern at all about accrediting this school. So, all right, Chair Davis, I think that concludes the SLA committee's report today.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to our Healthy Responsible Students Committee, chaired by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Reginald Keenan, the chair of the HRS committee, along with Alan Duncan. And we have two items to talk about. One is for new business and then one for discussion. But Mr. Chair, give me the privilege of just saying a brief moment about something personal, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank everyone who sent a prayer, sent a card, made a phone call, thought about my family during the recent loss of my sister, who was a very sweet lady, very wonderful person. But I just want to say again, thank you all for that, because that's what friends do. Friends help others try to get across hurdles that they didn't see coming down the road. So from my heart, thank you all very much. Now, we'll proceed now. Mr. Chair, if I may, on the first item for new business, we have the anonymous reporting system. I think Dr. Robert Taylor is going to discuss that, to say something, anonymous reporting system, and give us an update. So at this point, we ask Mr. Taylor to come forward and take it from there.
Thank you, Steve. Morning. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and members of the board. Again, welcome the opportunity to come back to a full board meeting and see board members. So we all take this opportunity to definitely think about how we meet moving forward. We've spent time talking about the academic portions of school, and so we do want to bring an opportunity to show that we are keeping schools safe, and that is very important. I do have with me this morning Karen, who is our Executive Director of the Center for Safe Schools, and Mike, who will also give some information on the data for Say Something Anonymous System. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of this program. Many of you are familiar with this, and so we will have others have an opportunity to hear this information, and then quickly kind of where we are in our year 3 implementation. And so with the system, as you are aware, each district team has members that has a 3 to 5 member team that is both for the schools and the school district. And this is what we call the multidisciplinary team, and they're responsible for monitoring the tip line, making sure that they capture any items that students may send in anonymously. One of the things that you may hear from the field is that these multidisciplinary teams may have to field phone calls late into the night. That is, I would say to the board that is somewhat of a misnomer. That is actually monitored by the center. And so what we would hope is that if there's a life-threatening event that says a student may commit suicide or do something dangerous at a school, then I would hope that anyone in the district would not object to getting a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we do want to share that with you just in case you hear that kind of information. You can go to the next slide so people can see that. I know that Matt Bristow Smith, as a principal, I'm not for sure if he is on that multidisciplinary team. Normally, it's going to consist of assistant principal, a guidance counselor, could be a school resource officer. That's not necessarily the principal, but in a small school, they may choose to do that. And even at the district level, even though the superintendent would be the person that could serve on that team, it's usually manned by someone else. And I know I certainly had people in my district that that manned that system and took those phone calls. In terms of year 3 implementation, where we are, we have several PSUs that are now coming on board. According to the legislation, many districts can opt out if they currently have a system. And so we actually have districts that are moving both in and out. We expect Elizabeth City, Pasquotank, Camden County, and Franklin County to join in the May and June of 2021. And so they will be getting acclimated with the system. There are other PSUs that have decided to opt out, and I will share that information later. There's about 18 PSUs that do have access to an anonymous reporting system. And finally, we do want to make sure that we give them access to additional information. As you can see, we have a technology program that includes the app that also gives them information about threat assessments and mental health first aid. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We do expect Guilford County, Winston-Salem, Forsyth, and Surrey County, and I think Stanley County schools to come on into the fall. And so there may be opportunities where districts, again, both move in and out of the system based on the choice that they have. And so at this point, I'll pause and over to Karen Fairley and Mike Anderson about more specifics with the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to be very brief and hand it over to Mike Anderson, who is the program manager. As Dr. Taylor already alluded to, we are preparing for year 3 implementation, but there is also the need for sustainability of year 1 and 2. And so we are definitely looking to do things to ensure that we have sustained the districts who originally came on in year 1 and 2, including the student refresher training, retraining. And because we were in the COVID season, there was still training being done via virtual Zoom, but we would like to ensure that they're getting refresher training in once they get back into the school year. We have over 500 SAVE clubs, which are crucial for sustainability. And these clubs help the children to work together to identify a trusted adult and also to support their peers. We have in the process of scheduling a customer service program to help with the sustainability, being intentional in outreach, the support that districts need. We want to be available for that. And of course, consultation. Dr. Taylor talked about, we have 18 districts that have opted out, including a tribal school. And we are working to see what help, if any, they need. Some opted out for various reasons because they already had a elementary school on an ARS system and they didn't want to do both, or they had contracts or whatever the reason. But we want to be intentional in approaching them during the year 3 to ensure that they have that ability to come on board. And I am going to now turn it over to Mike, and he will talk to you about the actual data tips that we have received from the inception of the program in November of 2019 up through 4/30/2021, because that's where we're going forward, start our data so that we have some consistency in the time frame.
Good morning. Great to see everybody's smiling faces.
Kudos to myself for remembering how to tie a tie this morning. It's been a while. All right, so let's get into the data from the Say Something anonymous reporting system. So the original contract was signed in July of 2019. We went live with several districts November 4th of 2019. And since then, up into that cutoff date of April 30th, we've had 5,528 total tips come through. Now, if you've never seen the dashboard, you have 27 different tip type categories. And I challenge you to say that quickly 3 times. So the tip type categories range from suicide ideation all the way down to littering, graffiti, and all that type stuff that you see on a school campus. Obviously, in 2020, the numbers went down, although the numbers were still there. We saw a lot of outreach for depression, suicide ideations, and such, and dealing with those kids being home and being isolated in 2020. Now that we're back in school, of course, we're already back out of school for the summer. We saw a slight increase in those numbers here as of late. So just in the reporting period, you can see between May 1st and April 30th was 1,671 total tips that came through. Between 11/4/2019 and April 30th, 2021, you see the total number of pretty much the top 5 tip type categories that came through. It's bullying, cyberbullying, cutting or self-harm, suicide and suicide ideation, depression, anxiety, drug use and distribution. Being a former law enforcement officer and having worked in several schools as an SRO, I can tell you what happens in a school always goes home, and what happens at home always comes to school. So we see a lot of these community issues being reported in the school system, which is great. The kids are starting to take ownership of their school, and they're doing that by being able to have that quiet / loud voice through this anonymous reporting system, like you'll see here. So, it's 878, and forgive me if my readers won't read that far. It's 878. Bullying, cyberbullying, cutting, self-harm is 676. All the way down to the drug use and distribution, which is 322. So you can see that basically the percentage, those top 5 tip types that come through. Now, I will tell you that the tip types vary if you run a report monthly. Some, it kind of goes in and out. We're seeing a lot of hate speech and a lot of sexual harassment, sexual assault things come through. So this is not, we don't just get these same 5 every single month. We have tip types that come in and out of these top 5 monthly. But generally speaking, this is the top 5 that we always have. All right, so life safety tips. Obviously, Dr. Taylor said earlier that when you get a life safety tip, what we have told districts all the time is when they had that concern about the phone ringing at all hours of the night, our concern and our response is, what would you do anyway? You would answer that phone, you would want that piece of information. That piece of information may corroborate, it may be the final piece of the puzzle that you may have missing that you were looking for to be able to prevent something from happening. The life safety tips, obviously there's a reporting period. This screen, I believe, shows that it's 267, 175. Man, my doctor's going to love me here. 138, 65, and 39. I did that without readers on. There's life safety tips, and there's a criteria, which I'll go over in a minute. Now, a lot of the times when tips come through the system, they don't have anything that's actionable. They don't have anything that we can verify. And we found a lot of that last year. So you'll have a tip, for example, a suicide or a suicide ideation that comes through, and the system is completely anonymous, where it'll say, I'm thinking about committing suicide, and it's totally anonymous. They give no PII, personal identifier information. And so we as a center work closely with the crisis center and start trying to piece that puzzle together. We get the local law enforcement involved. We also get the school systems involved to be able to try to find who tipped this in. And a lot of times it's just not actionable. We get a lot. We've received some tips over gaming systems where people have been on social media before. Through my friend knows a friend that has a friend in Florida that said that they posted they want to commit suicide. Now, I think there's a couple of districts in Florida that are allowed through the system. But one thing that's spectacular about the Sandy Hook system is that it doesn't matter if that district is live or not. They're going to work that tip if they get it, because they're working every day, 24/7, 365 to save the lives of these kids in these schools. So these are the non-actionable tips that came through, which you can see. Were not as high, but they were there. We also pull IP addresses. I've actually been on the computer at 2, 3 in the morning pulling tax information records to try to cross-reference parents' names or addresses to try to get law enforcement intervention out to those homes. So next. All right, so the top 5 non-life safety tips, obviously there it is again, it's 242. The 230, 230, 209, 190, and 89. So those are the ones that were not actionable. All right, so the criteria basically, and we explained it last year when we went through, there's 5 main criteria that we have for life safety tips. The first one is substantial bodily harm. The next one is it imminent? Is it in progress, or is it just occurred? Is the info credible? Is it clear and convincing? Do we have screenshots? The system has the availability to add audio, to add video. And so a lot of the times the tipsters will add the actual screenshots from the social media that they're seeing to further corroborate those type of tips. Does the suspect have the means to carry it through? And lastly, is it actionable? Is there enough information available for an intervention to occur right then and there? Right? All right, next. All right, so the current statistics when we're dealing with training, so there's 453,688 students that have been trained to date. There are 90 current live LEAs. There are 19 opt-outs to their traditional districts, and 142 live charter schools. What we found was, going throughout the state, we would find that there's a charter school right across from a middle or a high school that is actually live. And so we would go into that charter school or make contact with that charter school and say, hey, what happens at that high school is directly going to affect you at this charter school. And the kids intermingle and everything else outside of the school and community issues. So, charter schools that have jumped at the opportunity to be on the system as well. And it's 142 of them. And then absolutely all 911 centers that are participating where the app is live, which is a very crucial aspect of it. Thank you, Mike. And just to end, these are the districts that have opted out. And so according to the legislation, they do have the ability to either use the district system that we provide or develop their own system. So statutorily, they are required to have a system. One of the things that we are working on is developing the standards and guidelines for the operation of a tip line. I've asked that these be developed before the beginning of school, so districts will absolutely understand what their responsibility is as it relates to the tip line. Our main goal is to make sure that districts operate with fidelity with these programs, and that we don't have systems that are just in place, but not being properly monitored. Certainly want to make sure that we can accurate data to the State Board of Education as it relates to any tips and situations that are taking place in schools. So with that, we'll yield and answer any questions that you may have for the team.
Any questions or comments from
Chairman.
Jill?
Wendell.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Just a comment, really. If ever we needed evidence that the social emotional needs of our children, our students are present and perhaps worse over the last year, and that they must be addressed for them to continue to be successful in school, I think we just heard it.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chairman.
Go, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Hall.
Oh, thank you. Just a question, quick question. The sexual assaults, do you have data to say, is that peer-to-peer or outside the school setting?
It's usually peer to peer. Such and such hit me on the leg, or all that type stuff. So it's usually peer to peer. We have seen inappropriate relationships that are being reported, from in the community aspect as well. I want to make an important note that what it may go in as a tip through investigation, cooperation, and evidence and everything else, it might not come out as that. So in other words, it may come in as a sexual harassment or sexual assault. The school does the investigation and everything else, and they may disposition that tip as a bullying tip as well. So so it's not, it may go in as a sexual assault, but may come out as a bullying. Such hit me in the leg or hit me in the back of the head or whatever, and the person just really kind of picked the wrong category. We see a lot of that, especially when it comes to bullying. They really don't have opportunity to really kind of pick the right category. We see it also where they're talking about planned school attacks as well. Such and such said that they were going to beat me up after school. Well, then they classify that, or they tip it through a planned school attack. And then once the school investigates it, they'll disposition it into another category.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. And Dr. Taylor, I did want to just say that, from the field, I've been on the receiving end of the Say Something reporting system, have received tips about issues such as suicide ideation. And one of the things I appreciate about the way the system is set up is that, and I am on the team, right? But if I'm in a district leadership team meeting and am knee deep in working with our superintendent and I get pinged by the Say Something system, there is a bench that is 3 to 4 to 5 deep that if I don't immediately respond, they also get pinged. And so sometimes administrators are on the front lines getting those initial notifications, but sometimes we're playing catch up. One of the things I appreciate about this system is that the communication loops are so tight and the timelines are so short that my last experience with suicide ideation, by the time, I was maybe 5 minutes late to the notification, but by the time I did get up to speed with it, my counselor, my district high school director, our student support director, everyone was on the same page. So there was no need for us to establish a common baseline of information because everybody had been notified down the chain. We were ready to act. And so within just 30 minutes, we were able to respond quickly to address the issue with the student and the parent, get law enforcement to do a welfare check at the home. It was a really highly effective system. And what struck me was that it wasn't principal centered. It wasn't centered on any individual person. It was a structure that wherever there was a weak link, there were other stronger links there to make that connection. So I would say that my experiences with it have been very, very strong, and I'm so grateful for it. And when I look at some of these life-threatening issues, they are issues where the student may consider self-harm. Some of these are issues where the student may consider harm to others. And so the potential benefit for both individual students, but also for the school community cannot be overstated. And I think to Ms. Kamnitz's point, and every year that I've paid attention to these issues, I always appreciate Dr. Essex's presentations to the board about the need for us to continue to provide really strong advocacy for school social workers, for school psychologists, for mental health professionals to work in tandem with our school nurses and with our leadership at schools to provide wraparound services for students. Because one of the things that's true about the Say Something system is that these issues didn't appear because the system was created. What the system is doing is grabbing the data and documenting the issues that preceded the system and that will continue subsequent from it. So just all around, this provides data to drive a lot of the work of the board and of the legislature to make sure that we continue to be there for kids when they need us. Because one of the things that is true is that if you don't have an anonymous reporting system, kids may not elevate their concerns to the adults in their world. So thank you so much for this system, for everybody involved, and for the support of the board and the agency and the legislature, because we need this system.
I'll end with this, that It's certainly great to have the redundancy in the system. And it's great to see that this data is now being brought together in various areas so you can mitigate and intervene on the behalf of children. As a school teacher 20-some years ago, when you have a student to commit suicide and you say to yourself, if we had a system like this in place, could that have been prevented? And so that's why this work is so important to me, because I want to make sure that that never happens to anyone else. So we appreciate your time. I will look forward to any feedback that you may have.
Anyone else before we conclude? Dr. Hassan, do you have your hand up? Oh,
Right.
Alex?
Real
Mr.
quick,
Duncan?
Dr. Taylor, is there any hope that we'll be able to get two of the largest school systems in the state or part of the ones that have opted out? Wake and Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and some other significant districts as well. All of them are significant. But in terms of total numbers, as you just alluded to, in terms of having statewide data, it's hard to compile statewide data when you're missing some significant segments of the state from that data. Is there any inroads we can make in that area?
What we'll do is continue to reach out and ask that they be a part of this system. I think that's the most important part. They choose not to be a part of this. They still have to have a system in place. And our big concern is how that data is reported up to us so we can share with the state board. So we'll continue to make those inroads and hopefully it will become a system.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Anyone else before we, Dr. Taylor, we thank you all for presentation. Good work you're doing. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, we got one last matter for discussion. I think Dr. Essex is going to talk about the middle junior high school athletic manual update.
Good afternoon, and I'm between you and lunch, so I'll be brief. Each year I bring to you the middle school athletic manual for update. As you know, our section here at the department oversees a strong word. We support school districts around middle school athletics. This year, and you have in front of you just a few minor changes that we've made to date. Most of those are clerical, certainly changing Superintendent Truitt's name and adding to the manual. And the rest of those are clerical for now. Since presenting this or bringing this forward, we realize that we have one more possible rule change that we might want to make in order to support our districts better. And so if we do make that change, we'll bring that to you next month after we've done research to make sure that's going to be appropriate. And with that, we'll next month.
Any discussions, comment, questions? Thank you, Dr. Essex. Mr. Chair, that concludes the HRS committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. We'll now break for lunch and reconvene at 1:10. 1:10. Please stand by just for a moment in the room.